G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of SuperCoach Edge, and of course another entry for Damo's team talk coming out of round 16. Just came back from the Carlton win against the Tigs and up and about, but as soon as I opened my SuperCoach, the spirits dropped a little bit, and for reasons I'll get into very, very shortly. But of course, if you're tuning in for the first time, feel free to give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us any support you can. That would be absolutely fantastic. We really do appreciate it. But let's get into it, shall we? How we performed, and a bit of a sneak peek, shitful. Let's have a look at how we performed across the round. As you can see here, ended up scoring a 2,264, which was below par, as you can see here, with the season rank, despite the fact that last week I was singing from the hills, had the trumpets out, got the parades happening. I'd completed my team. And what I thought was, I wasn't kidding myself. I knew there were a couple of chinks in the armour, even though it was a complete team. I was saying complete in inverted commas because there were a couple of liabilities, I'll call them. Jack Steele being one of them, Tim English being another. Other guys that I kind of had a little bit more confidence in turning around, like a Tom Green and the like, especially with the return of Cogs in recent weeks. But this was a week that kind of is a bit of a, out of all the weeks I reckon across the season, this has kind of been the biggest kick in the head because really, to come out of thinking that you've completed your team, not only that, but also going to this round, I brought in Rosie off the back of Clark with 170k in the bank, purpose made in order to get him in as that 23rd man, M9, just to, I guess, give me that extra tactic ahead of the rest of the competition to screen a score of a player in the midfield that I was kind of least confident in. So I put the emergency on them. And this week it was Tookie Miller, who ended up scoring well. But as you can see, yes, if I didn't say it already, apologies if I already did, but I'm already losing my mind. Season rank 2,614 overall, and the rank ended up sliding down 389 spots. League wins only won 5 out of the 12, which again tells the tale. Team value is above 14 million, 99,900, which sounds good, but just wasn't to be. Before we get into my team, though, let's have a quick look at the team of the week, because I want to really see the players that played well and the ones that we missed out on, really, because that's kind of the big difference, which is obvious to say, but it's not just the players that you have that perform badly, it's the players that you've missed out on that aren't in your team that scored well. So here we go. We're just looking at the, for those of you tuning into the audio podcast, I'm just currently looking at the team that ended up scoring the most for the week, and it was a mammoth week for this team at 2,732 points, if you don't mind. A few pods as well. Richards 116, Ed Richards that is. Adam Saab 118, Sicily 142, even though he popped at his shoulder. Blakey 148. He had Bont as his captain, which obviously helped. Flanders, Dacos, Neil, Dunkley 143, which is a big surplus of points there because I think he is a relative pod. Nankervis 121, Cherry 141, just incredible there. That kind of sums things up. Heaney, Zorko, Rankin 121, Jackson, Pickett 122, and Darcy with a 71. So tip of the cap to that coach who ended up scoring the most for the week, but I don't know if it was that week or my team was just shit, but let's have a look at our team just now, and we'll go line by line as we always do, and it's just going to remind me and frustrate me even more because there's premos galore, but they weren't scoring like it. I think to sum it up, I think I ended up having 9 players that only scored 100 and above, and I think there might have been 7 players that scored below 80. Let me just have a quick count of that. So Houston 59, Martin 75, Merritt 78. Who else was there? English 70, Gorn 79, Kerno 54, and Jackson 72. So yeah, that's 7 players below 80, which just isn't good enough. And to only have 9 players scoring 100 and above, which, mind you, the only big scores that we've had for the week are Bont with his 157 and my man Walshy with the 148. Aside from that, like the other tons was Sheasel 103, Ryan 116, Dacos 116, who was my captain, Butters 114, Green 117, Zorko 115, and Flanders 114. Everyone else, just not up to it really. Don't like to be negative, of course, but it's just awfully frustrating because, you know, any other week where you've had a down week, you always have trades and you have a strategy in mind where, like, you know, you're always aiming to upgrade your team, and you can look forward to bringing in players that are going to help elevate your team and hopefully, you know, I guess increase the average of the team overall over the coming weeks. But because, you know, I'm at the stage now where I've, you know, brought in supposed premos and even a 23rd player, which you would have thought would have helped me, you know, have a reasonable week. It just isn't the case. So I'll talk to, I guess, the 23rd man first up before we go through line by line. But as you can see here, for those people tuning into the YouTube video, Tookie Miller was my emergency, was my M9, just because even though he had a really good historical average against the Pies, and it was obviously a home game for Gold Coast, boded well, condition suited, all that sort of stuff. I put the emergency on Miller just because of his poor recent form, and, you know, I guess used him as the emergency to screen his score. As it turned out, he scored the 121, so activated my non-playing player in Rawlinson from the Eagles, put him on field, and was able to loop on Miller's 121. Rosie, who, as you know, I've spoken about, he was brought in as my, you know, traditional M9 23rd man. Didn't really need to use him. I was tempted to switch Steele off for Rosie, which probably would have been a good move, but as it turns out, it only would have netted me an extra 8 points between both of those players, so much for muchness there, really. So, yeah, and I'll talk about in terms of what I'll look to do going into round 16 with that strategy, and hopefully it can help me and give me a bit of a leg up, but don't know if it will considering matchups this coming round. Outside of that, captain's VC. So I'll put the VC on Zorka, which a lot of people would have as well. Scored a 115. Wasn't quite the 120 plus mark that I usually look to lock in, you know, if it's been scored by my VC. I thought I'd give it a little bit of a roll of the dice, considering Dacos up against the Suns. Thought he might have run right, which he did, but not until late. And yeah, scored his points very, very late in the game, and got scaled back, actually, considering that, and Gold Coast ended up winning. So he scored the 116, netted me an extra point. That was probably the only real positive to come out of this week, really. So yeah, that was that. Liam and I spoke about it in the weekly podcast, but, you know, Bont was a good shout. But with that back niggle that came out, what was it, on Thursday or thereabouts, he had a back spasm or something, and, you know, he posted it on Twitter. We said, you know, will Bont come out and emulate his, you know, his flu game that he had the other week when he came out and went bananas? And as it turns out, he did. So 157 by him. Kudos to those people that backed him in. And as it turns out, if he goes out with one leg next time, I reckon I'll back him in for the captaincy. Really, he's an absolute freak. I was a big fan of Walshy as well up against the Tigs, who conceded a few points to opposition mids. But playing in the last game made it a little bit awkward. So yeah, opted for Dacos in the end. So let's go through line by line, and then we'll go through, I guess, strategies from here on out, because, you know, they're pretty restricted. I mean, not too restricted, because we still have 4 trades up our sleeves, but we don't really want to be tempted by the it's a bit of Adam and Eve type scenario. Like, you're tempted by the you know, the apple or thereabouts, whatever it is. I don't know, I haven't read the Bible, but you get the gist. You know, I'm awfully tempted to dip into my trades, and they are the injury reserve trades, keeping in mind, of course, that, you know, we've got still 7 rounds after this to go, up to round 24. So, you know, we still have 4 trades up our sleeve, and we want to use them wisely more than anything. We saw with Fisher, he actually got subbed out in the 83. We don't know yet if that was due to, because I think he hobbled off field, but online they're saying that it was more of a strategic move by Clarko / psychotic move, if it was, because he was killing it at that stage. But, you know, we don't want to be being too brash with trades remaining that we have, and find that we run out of trades when we get, injuries in the last, 2-3 rounds of the season, and shoot ourselves in the foot because we're forced to gobble a donut, as we were, I think, last year in the last round, despite the fact that we had a 23rd ban. So that's kind of one thing we need to, I guess, temper our expectations for, and put out the, push aside the temptation to use those trades. So anyway, let's go through defense first and foremost. As I said, Dacos, he was my captain, 116. Sheasel, 103, kicked a nice snag as well, looked really good. Surprised he didn't actually score more than 103, but everyone's got him, is what it is. Dan Houston, this man. Now, we spoke about it in the weekly podcast, Liam and I, and we spoke about him in the I'm the Captain Now segment, and we obviously identified him as an option. I didn't really like him just purely because of the fact that when he previously played St Kilda, he'd only scored the 107, and I don't know what that was due to, and I was a little bit wary because, most of the other defenders, they kind of play into the hands of St Kilda where their all-over game plan is kind of built in their defence, and they push right up and force the opposition defence to start chipping the ball around and switching the play and racking up the pill in order to try and find a way through the St Kilda, I guess, defensive press. But this game, I didn't see any of it because I was obviously at the Carlton game. But looking at the score, I have no idea how he scored a 59 against the team that allows the most points to opposition defenders. 59 as well, mind you, which is his lowest score for the season. Just so perplexing. So if anyone tuning in, let us know that watched the game. But 14 disposals, 2 marks, just not good enough. Just pretty piss poor, really. So that was one sort of shot in the arse, really, because he's owned by 26% of the competition, but that's only a quarter of the competition, really. So when you're in that ownership percentage, more often than not, it's going to hurt you. So I reckon that's a big part of, the reason why we scored so shit this week. And it was hard because, a lot of people would have been in the same boat where heading into the round, I think I was projected for around about 25-70 odd. And then heading into Sunday, I think it was projected for 23.50 or something. And obviously dropped below that as well. So Houston, I'm gonna point the finger at you. He helped me out with that first week that I brought him in, which was his previous game. 3 games ago, like against the Giants, 174, which was Stewart's buy round, and I flipped Stewart to Houston. But it's almost at the stage where Stewart's almost leveling what Houston's done in accumulative points. So Houston's still ahead by a little bit, but it's just so frustrating. It just really does show the how quickly things can turn. And likewise for those people that traded out the likes of Tom Green, didn't back him in. He scored the 150 odd last week and a 117 this week. So swings and roundabouts, because it obviously comes down to matchups and stuff. But really, when it comes to that matchup with Houston, he should have been like a minimum of 100. So bit of an annoyance there. Lukey Ryan, 116, was able to, I guess, make up ground a fair bit. Wasn't looking like he was going to score too high, but did well enough against the Swans. Wanganeen Miller at 92, kind of par for the course with him. Again, I think he's probably one of the lower owned players that I have in my team. 14.2%. So unless he has a breakout game, really, he's going to be more of a negative than anything. But the one saving grace is he does have a relatively high floor, as you can see. 115, 113, 112, 118, 104 was a good run that he went on, but his past couple, 90 and 92, he's been okay. He scored quite a few 90s and thereabouts, so he's not the biggest issue in my team. But Nick Martin, 75, I think by and large, like even Ridley scored pretty shit in the game against the Cats, so I think it was just maybe one of those games, but I'll need to check in with Liam. He was obviously there at the game as well to see what Nick Martin's role was, because I think the previous week against the Eagles, he was playing more time on the wing, which isn't a bad thing. Like, that's kind of his traditional position. Scored well enough in previous seasons, but not quite to the piggery that he showed earlier in the season. So he's really dropped away since virtually last time he played the Eagles, really, round 8. Ever since then, 83, 100, 97, 80, 92, 112 and a 75. So he's dipped down to the level of a Wangan and Miller. So both of those combined aren't really helping me. But then again, we had the likes of Hayden Young, who's another option that I was looking to bring in instead of Houston, who also went shit. So, as I said, swings and roundabouts. Moving to the midfield, and obviously just on the bench as well, quickly in defence was Dawson and Reed, both obviously out injured for the midfield. I spoke about Bont, 157, an absolute gun, just an absolute freak. Gunning for a Brownlow, him and Cripper at the moment. And Dacos as well. But Zachary Merritt, 78, he was absolutely on fire up until around about halftime. Was getting tagged, and then I think he got pushed forward by all reports. Just didn't really touch it the second half. Only scored the 78, which was a bit of a kick in the dick. Caleb Sarong, 85, same sort of thing. He started like a house on fire. And then James Jordan, who was tagging Clark from defence, he then was pushed onto Sarong, and when that happened, he pretty much got blanketed, which didn't help. Zach Butters, I think he was being tagged, Butters, or at least had some attention, but to his credit, scored a 114, so I tip of the cap to you, young man. Sammy Walsh, as I said, my absolute gun, 148. Thank the Lord that Champion Data have actually allocated the correct points to him, because he, again, had another blinder. I've spoken about it in previous games where he's actually had a really good game and hasn't yet had those ceiling scores, like the game against Gold Coast, 114. Port had a good game, 111. Geelong had a good game, 110. Melbourne, another really good game, 119. So thankfully, he actually was given the points that he deserves by Champion Data. So maybe they've traded him into their team. That's really the only explanation. But thank you, Walshy. Jack Steele, spoke about him, 95. Just not hitting the heights is what he could in previous seasons when he was at full flight. He's still got that high floor, which is kind of saving him, but yeah, it's just not good enough. Tom Green, was confident in him turning his form around. Had a really, really lean patch, but I think with Corks back in the team, he's going to help him. Had a run there from round 10 to round 14 of 95, 78, 79, 80, and then his previous two, 153 and a 117. So good to see him back in form, the great man. Surprised that his ownership didn't drop more, but over that time, it kind of dropped down to 47, like 1%, if that's, or 0.7%, and then went up off the back of his 153 against the Swans to 49.2% ownership. Tookie Miller, spoke about him. He was my M9 on the bench with the emergency. He scored the 121. So good to see him actually, recapturing some form ever so briefly. His ownership's dropped down from 24% from round 13 to 20.5% with this round just gone. So he might become a bit more of a pod, which he has, I guess, because he's lost 4% or 3.5%. So yeah, hopefully he can continue his form. And if it does so happen that, he's the kind of the ace up the sleeve as my, M9, if I'm able to put the emergency on him first and foremost and screen his scores, that might actually be able to help me. Didn't really help me in my league, cash league, because my opponent actually had Tookie Miller as well. So any benefit that I had with screening the score was kind of null and void. Rosie 103 on the bench, as I said, kind of weighing up. Do I go for Steele? Do I go for Rosie? Only an 8-point difference, so not too shabby. Dowling from the Crows, 57 on the bench, making a bit of coin if we need to cash in someone at a later date. Gawn 79, that was a really interesting game. Just couldn't get into it. Was a big surprise, really, because I think a few people had him as a VC, but McInerney, by and large, is pretty restrictive. And 79 is actually his second lowest score since round 0, when he scored a 72. So, yeah, 79, just not hitting the marks there, but I think he's probably one of the most owned players in the ruck. So 57.8% is what it is. Tim English, this bloke here has to be contending for the worst trade-in for the season for me. Just looks disinterested. Like, you watch him, And I know there's players that have down games, but a 70, which is his second lowest score for the season, just isn't good enough. It's an absolute kick in the dick. Went down 15.2%. Like off the back of a 136 the previous week. The previous game, because he obviously had the bye last week. It's just perplexing. Like his ownership is 22.1%, which isn't really high enough. I mean, it's not going to be. I mean, Gawn's going to be the highest owned ruckman. So if you're going to have a down game, you don't want it to be your ruckman, because it's either the other ownership is going to be split across English, Marshall, Grundy. So yeah, like if you have a bit of a downer. Thankfully, Grundy had a bit of a downer. Marshall was okay. I think he turned up. But yeah, English is just an absolute plotter. And it looks disinterested. I reckon he's already signed for a WA team. It certainly seems that way. He's not running to contests. He's not spreading. He's not getting out wide to receive the ball. Like comparing to a De Koning, to a Grundy, he's just not doing enough. As that mobile ruckman that he is, and we know that he can do. So, yeah, I think I ended up getting him. Actually, when did I trade him in? It would have been when he dipped down to a pretty low price. I think it was around about, I think it was a game after Sydney. I think he was about 560 odd. And believe it or not, he's actually gone lower than that. So, yeah, just a shitful thing. But there's no one to trade him to, really, because I don't have the coin. Nathan Kruger was R3, 64, and that just highlights how shit English went. Like 64 from Kruger, 6 points away from beating or at least leveling him. Just incredible. Moving into the forward line, Flanders 114, he was on track for an incredible score. I think he spent the last 10 minutes or something on the bench of that game, which was surprising considering it was going down to the wire against the Pies. But he was virtually on track for like a score of 150. Only scored the 114, but is what it is. Everyone's virtually got Flanders in their team. So, yeah, 59.2% ownership. So whatever he scores, it's going to affect everyone in the competition virtually, all the ones that are taking things seriously in Supercoach. Heaney, 85. He was due for a bit of a downer, I think. Like he's been riding the wave of nice scores, 85, which is his lowest for the season, and it feels like that's the common theme for players in my team, having their season low scores this week. But again, he's in 63.9% of teams, so again, whatever he scores is going to affect, by and large, the majority of the competition. Dane Zorko, 115, was looking for a better score than that. Surprised that he didn't. I think he racked up the pill a bit later in the game, which was good, but yeah, he kind of was teetering around about, and was hoping for a bit of a bigger score. 40.1% of teams, again, teetering towards that majority. Zach Fisher, 83, as I said, he was subbed off. Was it tactical? We don't know. That's what it's being reported as, but if it is, that's just a dumbass move by Clarko, really, because he was one of the best rebounding defenders. Like, bias aside, the fact that he was in my team, I was watching the game and actually looked really good. He was providing run and carry. He was pushing right up the ground. So I don't know what the issue is there, but 30.6% of teams own him. Luke Jackson, 72, and I know, like, I've spoken about this guy. Like, he's in my team virtually to provide a bit of ruck cover. And it's virtually at that stage where, he's a bit of a liability. And now that I've got Kruger, I mean, Kruger could get injured, knock on wood, but could get injured at the drop of a hat, as we know. So we do need ruck cover. And English, who knows, really, if we could loop him, that'd be fantastic. But he's had in his past, dating back to, like, he's had his first two games of the season, 113, 178, Luke Jackson. Then his next ton was 8 rounds later in round 10. Then after that, where he scored a 154. Then after that, in round 14, scored a 115. So he's had, 1, 2, 3, 4 tons across the entirety of the season from 15 rounds that he's played. So again, liability, but he's in 42% of teams. And you'd think, given the high ownership, it kind of covers you to an extent. And I think it does, but I don't know. I'm thinking now, like, do I need some more pods in order to try and make up ground? Potentially. I think Curnow was one of those players I was hoping to be that player. Helped last week when I brought him in, scored the 118 or thereabouts. Yeah, 118 as you can see there. His ownership went up by exactly 4% after last week. So he's still in 16.3% of teams. And against the Tigs, I thought he might have torn them to shreds. But wasn't to be. It was one of those games where Richmond, by and large, and like Carlton was as well, to kind of, I guess, negate it and combat it. But it was a very, very congested game. Both sides were kind of pushing up their forwards into the middle of the ground and really congesting things. So it was one of those things that it was, the 450 entries, by and large, Carlton were just bombing them in. And I think I remember maybe 3 contested marks, where it was, Charlie took one late in the game. Harry took a couple. May have been a few more, but a lot of them were just like, Richmond's tactics were to press into their defence, into Carlton's forward line, and really congest things up. So Mackay and Curnow couldn't get a free look at it, and then blocking up space as well, so they couldn't really kick to leads. Like, I can't recall really any leads, especially in the first half, where, Harry and Charlie especially were given that freedom to roam and take contested marks in the lead. So, yeah, or even uncontested marks, really. So that didn't help, I think, the game style. So I'm going to blame you, Uze. Yeah, but 54 from him, and as I said, as a pod, it hurts you, really. It does. Moving on to the bench, Revel, to his credit, scored a 95, and he was my emergency. And as I said, like in one of the, or a couple of the private chats that I'm in with other content creators, that I would have been keen to bench Jackson in order to loop on Revel's score, but there was no way for me to do it. Rawlinson, who is a forward mid DPP non-playing player for West Coast, I could have done it with him, but it would have meant that I would have had to have switched a Heaney or a Flanders or a Zorko. I know Zorko would have already played, but like a Heaney or a Flanders into the midfield and play them, obviously in that spot, and then potentially bench someone like a Steele. And then with Miller as my emergency, I wouldn't have been able to loop his score on if I used Rawlinson in the forward line to loop on Revel's score. So, it worked out better because Miller scored the 121 compared to Revel's 95. But if I had a Livingston, for example, instead of Kruger, that would have allowed me to bench Jackson at R3 and then loop on Revel's score, which compared to Jackson would have netted me an extra 23 points. So, yeah, is what it is. Outside of Revel, Richard scored us 36, which is pretty good considering that he came on late as that sub. So, yeah. Alrighty, let's have a look ahead to round 17. Sorry, I just went on a bit of a sneezing fit then. I'm not tearing up about my team, even though it is quite saddening. So, let's have a look in terms of, I guess, first up we have Collingwood up against Essendon. I think Dacos is going to be, the most VC'd in the competition. I'm thinking, do I try and go for a bit of a pod? No, not really. I think if Dacos goes massive, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot more often than not because of his high ownership. So you don't want to be missing out on a massive score from good old Dakes. How has he gone previously up against the Dons? 71, 145 and a 128 earlier this season. So, yeah, I think Dakes is going to be hands down the VC. If you go shit, there's a chance there to really go pod if you want to with your captain. So, in terms of captaincy, who could we go? Well, there's Bond again. He's projected for a 155, which is quite hilarious. How's he touched up for previously? Jeez. 128, 145 and 125. Bit of a mix of Adelaide Oval and Marvel games there. So, Bont may be the one. He's in some supreme form, as we know. Sure. Reedy's past 5. 135, 186, 99 against the Lions, 162 and a 157. So I think Bont probably speaks for itself in terms of captaincy options. Averages 109.6 against Port. So 145, 125 and a 128. Even beyond that, 67, 114, 130, 129. So, yeah, I think he's probably hands down the best C option outside of Dacos with the early VC. Butters, does he cop a tag from the Dogs? Don't know, but his previous 352, 146 and 118. Tookie Miller does play North Melbourne. He scored a 40, 86 and a 122, which was earlier this season in round 9. Yeah, he had, 29 disposals, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 1 goal, 1. Outside of that, Gawn. Who's Gawn play? Melbourne up against West Coast. He didn't score too crash hot when they faced early in the year. Round 10, only scored the 109, so I don't have confidence in Gawn. English is virtually out of my side, but he's going to be facing Jordan Sweet potentially. He scored a 49, 139 and a 99 in his previous 3, so no. Wouldn't have confidence in doing it, especially as a captain, let alone as a VC. Sydney up against St Kilda, so maybe a Heaney. Could I go down that route again? 59, 114, a 75. No. He's kind of lost a bit of his ceiling, I think, Heaney, in recent times. Brisbane up against Adelaide, which is the last game of the round. Zorko scored a 76, 94 and 117. Let's just have a look quickly at DFS Australia to check out the defence v position to see if there's any matchup exploitations here. So key forwards, Carlton is playing. Just thinking about Charlie Curnow, GWS, who don't concede too much to key forwards. Inside mids. Okay, so Colin went up against Essendon, and Essendon actually concede the third most points to inside mids. That bodes well for Dacos as the VC, so that's definitely a lock-in even more so. West Coast, who have West Coast playing Melbourne, so Clary if you've got him, but I wouldn't be putting the VC or the C on him. Might bode well for English. Hopefully this should be a bounce-back game against Port, because Port actually concede the third most points to opposition rucks. So no excuses here for English, really, unless he's a lazy bastard again, which he definitely is. Yeah, outside of that, there were I may be missing a standout. Maybe a Walsh. How does Walsh go up against the Giants? 149, a 90 and a 130. I don't mind that. There isn't really an exploitation with matchups for the stats side of things. Scored that 130 back in round 6 against the Giants as well, mind you. Played a blinder. Green against my mob. 100, 145. I think he scored the 82 earlier this year. So I think that probably settles it, like Dacos VC into Bont C. In terms of how I use my 23rd man with Rosie, I reckon I'll probably use the same tactic as round 15. So I'm kind of forced into this because the only player that plays before Rosie, which is obviously Port Adelaide, Port play the third game up against the Dogs. And of those players that I'm kind of a bit weary about, which is Steele and Miller, Miller's the only player of those two that plays before Rosie, which is a second game up against North. I could do a bit of a shifty if I really wanted to and go contrarian, an extra pod, by putting Merritt as my emergency against the Pies. But normally he scores quite well from memory. Yeah, 123, 133 and a 127. So I don't think I'll do that. That'd be pretty silly to do. So I reckon Miller, even though he's facing North Melbourne and should score well, has scored well earlier this season with 122, that's the only way that I can kind of find an edge. Players can break down as well during games. They can get subbed, all that sort of stuff. So who knows? Or we could just completely have a downer. He may get actually tagged by Will Phillips, maybe, if he doesn't tag Rowell. So I think that, like, in terms of tactics, that's probably the most viable thing that I can do, and use Rawlinson, obviously, from West Coast as that loop option. Alternatively, if Miller spuds it up somehow against North, I obviously play Rosie, and then I could use Rawlinson to, if I needed to, put Rawlinson to the forward line and bench a player like we couldn't do a Rebel because Rebel plays last in the round. We could do it with Richards potentially. So we might put the E on Richards, provided Richards isn't a sub, obviously. If he goes bananas, I will, on the Friday night, like I'm talking like 100 plus, I would be comfortable in potentially, benching a Curnow or a Jackson, maybe. Just because, you got to remember, even though Curnow, I've said this in the past, that he's more of a mobile key position player. He's not a traditional key position forward. Given his mobility, he can play tall, can play small, good below his knees, all that sort of stuff. He is, at his core, a key position forward, and he's kind of dictated by the way that the opposition defence play a man on him, really, a man up. So, of those in my forward line, I think those are probably the two that I'd be least confident in, Jackson and Curnow. So that's another tactic as well. So at least there's a couple of options there. Don't think Richards is going to go bananas against the Dons, but in limited game time, he actually scored a 36. And his game time on ground was only 44 minutes, so just over a quarter. So, 36 in just over a quarter. What's that? 70, 100. He was on track for around about 120 if he was going to keep that rate of scoring, which he won't, but because it was a close game, I think he kind of got some extra scaling points late in the game. But at least it gives me some flexibility in terms of, using a bit of a loophole across both midfield and the forward line. So that's virtually it, ladies and gents. I don't think there's anything else. Like in terms of those trades that I've got, as I said, I would be comfortable to use one of those, but closer to the end of the season. Like there's still 7 rounds to go. It's not viable. Like I think maybe after next week I might look to do it, but I've only got 5.2k in the bank. The only players I'd be looking to get rid of is probably English, who I can't afford anyone of note. Like I could probably trade him to Marshall, but even then, Marshall, is he really going to give me any extra points compared to what English is? Probably not. And he's even more of a pod, so I guess that can be beneficial, but also a curse at the same time if Marshall goes shitter than English. So I'll have to weigh that up. But I don't think I'll be keen to use a trade on him for anyone else that's available. So outside of that, like Steele would be really the only one, and yeah, there aren't really any others. We're at a point where we need to almost use 2 trades to cash in someone like a Revel in order to, give us some extra cash to bring in someone of worth of a higher price range. But yeah, we're going to bank on Rosie to hopefully get us out of this with the ace up the sleeve, and hopefully my Premo team can all fire at the same time. Like really, it's the most frustrating thing when you're at this point of the season and you're like, yep, okay, kick up your feet on the desk, put your hands behind your head, just relax, sipping pina coladas, and you're like, we've got a Premo team, it'll fire. We're bound for like 2,300 plus every single week, 2,400 plus every single week, and it just doesn't happen, which is so frustrating. So hopefully it can all click. And yeah, we have to kind of put the faith in the SuperCoach gods to give us a bit of luck. And then, yeah, we'll look to potentially make some moves next week. But with that, ladies and gents, let us know if you have any thoughts as well, how you went this round. And yeah, any thoughts that you may have, any recommendations you may have for my team and what I could do. Always open to suggestions, of course. Thanks, though, for tuning in. Hopefully you had a very, very nice round, a better round than me. And with that, we'll catch you in the main episode this week. And of course, make sure to tune into that. We chat trades, we chat captains, we banter, we talk shit, some jokes thrown in as well, stats, everything else. So make sure to tune in. Thank you, as always, for tuning into this, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.